And we are back. Sorry about the. Well, sorry, it's not. Hang on, it's sending data. Jumping the gun. Can you tell I'm kind of pissed off at this?
Oh, technology.
Indeed. Okay, we're back. Sorry about that, folks.
Fun. Fun.
Yep, fun.
Everything went down the moment I said or asked, like, is this a good time for me to jump in? Stream crashes.
It's a thing. It's always going to be a thing.
Yep.
So, where we crashed out at was me explaining the warranty and limitation of liability a little bit more in depth. As I said, it's a standard warranty and limitation of liability clause you tend to see in most licenses. It's saying that the licensor is all they're doing is granting you a license to use this content, and anything else that arises from you using the content isn't their fault. If you go bankrupt with the way you use it, that's your fault, not theirs. If you cause damages to your person or to your business using it, that's your fault, not theirs. That's what this entire warranty covers. And with that, I think we'll go back into this with the final section. And if you don't mind, Monk, I'll just take the whole thing since it's just half a page.
Yeah.
Section 5, or Article 5, or however you want to call it, other terms and conditions. Subsection A, termination and remedies. Your license to use the ORC content will terminate automatically if you fail to comply with the terms and conditions of this ORC license. Your license will be reinstated, effective as of the date of termination, if you cure such violation on a going-forward basis without the obligation to destroy inventory on hand within 60 days of your discovery of the violation, or if the licensor waives such violation in writing. No such termination shall affect, limit, or disrupt the rights of any licensor or downstream licensee of any ORC content under any ORC license. Only the licensor and licensor's upstream licensors under this ORC license, which you are deemed to be in privity herewith, may bring enforcement action against you hereunder. This constitutes a limitation on licensor remedies with respect to the license grant in the ORC content hereunder. However, this ORC license neither limits licensors' remedies in any way with respect to license product identity, nor does it limit licensors' right to offer the ORC content or product identity under separate terms or conditions. So this termination and remedy section basically says if you fuck up your ORC license responsibilities, you have 60 days moving forward from the date of your termination upon discovery of the violation to remedy the violation, in which case you'll be reinstated and it'll be effective as of the date of your termination, so it's like you were never terminated, essentially. Or the licensor can waive that violation. But this only affects you. If you have a violation, it only affects you. If someone else has made derivative works of yours and they have ORC license through you, they're a downstream licensee that now made a derivative work of your work, they aren't affected. They're not in violation unless they've made a violation of their own. And this also limits how a licensor and any licensors above them. So using, again, a good example, someone derives from Pathfinder, and then the person who derived, and then you derive from that person who derives from Pathfinder. If you fuck up, only the person who derived from Pathfinder and Paizo themselves can bring enforcement against you, but it's limited to basically turning off your license. Now, if you fuck with their product identity instead, they have all the remedies in the world they can take with that. And they can always offer the ORC content and product license under separate terms and conditions if they'd like to. Then we have Section B, modifications. This ORC license may not be amended, superseded, modified, updated, repealed, revoked, or deauthorized. Neither you nor licensor may modify the terms of this ORC license. However, you may enter into a separate agreement of your own, making provided such agreement does not seek to modify the terms hereof. This ORC license does not and shall not be interpreted to reduce, limit, restrict, or impose conditions on any use of the ORC content that could lawfully be made without permission under this ORC license. To the extent possible, if any provision of this ORC license is deemed unenforceable, it shall be automatically reformed to the minimum extent necessary to make it enforceable. If the provision cannot be reformed, it shall be severed from this ORC license without affecting the enforceability of the remaining terms and conditions. No term or condition of this ORC license shall be waived, and no failure to comply consented to unless expressly agreed to by the licensor. Nothing in the ORC license constitutes or may be interpreted as a limitation upon or waiver of any privileges and immunities that apply to the licensor or you, including from the legal processes of any jurisdiction or authority. So earlier we mentioned in some of the other limitations and rights that you cannot restrict the license rights of people receiving ORC content or the ORC license. But this modification section explicitly, in no uncertain terms, says you motherfuckers can't change this. You try to change it, fuck you, is essentially what it says.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure Paizo has made it explicitly clear that while they would prefer not to get into a legal battle with Wizards of the Coast regarding some of the material, if it comes down to it, they will throw hands.
Mm-hmm.
And there were like 1,500 companies that signed on, and I see Jeremy in the comments saying either a license is opened or it's not. This is not. It's as simple as that. That's not the case. This is an open license. All that it's saying is that you weren't here for it earlier, Jack, but there's a lot of material in this license that is going out of its way to make explicitly clear that this is not something that can be retroactively changed.
Yes. This license grants all of these license rights. In fact, just to quote it again, because there are people who probably missed the first half. The term licensor hereby grants you a worldwide, royalty-free, non-sub-licensable, non-exclusive, irrevocable license to exercise the licensed rights in the ORC content, to use the ORC content in whole or in part. Additionally, there's also other things that are good, like the licensor waives any rights to collect royalties. Moral rights are not held, so there's no morality clauses that will be used against you. Everything in this draft is saying anything that is considered part of the ORC license and the ORC content, use it. Just attribute us and give the notices we've said that you need to, and use it. Go ahead. Mm-hmm. Have fun, essentially. Yep. And I think this will probably be covered with more digestible terms in the acts, because this is all very heavy-handed legalese. And while I am not a lawyer, and my sister is, and my uncle was a lawyer, and I am good at identifying and parsing legalese, again, I'm going to repeat the disclaimer from the previous half of this stream. We are not lawyers. Do not think we are lawyers. Do not think that what we are seeing is legal advice. If you use any of this as if it's legal advice, that's on you. Fuck you. You can eat shit.
Yeah, and the sole reason I wanted to cover it is because I don't see a whole lot of the LawTube crowd covering this, and I honestly think this is something that would be absolutely best served covered by them. I haven't checked if the rules lawyer is covering it, but guys like Nick, guys like Nate the lawyer, guys like Legal Mindset, guys like Good Logic, Uncivil Law. I haven't seen any, or even Lawful Masses, who this would be right in his wheelhouse because because IP law and copyright law is his area of expertise specifically. I haven't seen any of them cover this. And I know somebody will say, what about Legal Eagle? What about Legal Eagle?
I mean, Legal Eagle covered the OGL fiasco when it was developing, but he hasn't gone any further than that.
One, he hasn't gone any further than that. Two, he's not going to drag Matt Colville on again because he's busy with other things. And three, I had some issues with the way he was covering some things, and some things he skimmed over. but that's just me. In fact, the only reason a whole lot of people knew about this thing going on was because of his flashy ass coverage. Um, but he did bring up something that we already know and knew for about 200 years. Um, the rules and specifically mechanics are not a copyrightable thing.
Yes.
That's been a Supreme Court decision since the 1880s.
Yes.
So, the ORC Acts, which is the other half, the answers and explanations for the ORC license, which outright has the logo for Azora Law, and the draft-only watermark is a little bit less obnoxious.
Yeah, it's a lot more transparent than it was in the actual license document.
Mm-hmm. It goes, how does the ORC so it starts off with, how does the ORC license work? The ORC license is a license that can be used by anyone to open up their game up for others to use. The ORC license is game mechanic agnostic. If you put the ORC notice in your work, then your protectable game mechanics, thus plus any product identity that you expressly dedicate to the gaming community, are open for others to use under the ORC license. All you have to do is put an ORC notice in your product and you're done. The ORC notice looks like this. And it's more or less the same ORC notice that we saw before. It's just a little bit more specific on some parts. Specifically attribution, product identity, and expressly designated ORC content, which for attribution, it writes, this product is compatible with and based on the following ORC content. Raptor Game System version 1.0, copyright Azora Entertainment Corporation, designed by Brian Lewis. If you like and use our ORC content, please credit us in your product as follows. Raptor Imperium, copyright O Cthulhu Games Incorporated, designed by Share Luck.
I think it's supposed to be OK Thulu Games,
Yeah,
as
okay.
in OK.
Mm-hmm. I hope to God they're not headquartered in Texas.
The OK Thulu Corral.
Product identity. Identity elements in this product include, but may not be limited to, Bloodbeak, Thondor, Glamfeather, and Richard the Righteous, and all elements designated as product identity under the ORC license. Expressly designated ORC content. The following elements are owned by the licensor and would otherwise constitute product identity and are hereby designated as ORC content. The names of each class of professions, such as Raptor Wrangler.
Okay, so that basically that shows there that in this case, Raptor Imperium is based off of Raptor Game System version 1.0. The product identity is for specific names, and that the names of classes could be seen as product identity, but they chose to designate them as ORC content because they're for classes, and probably you would need those to make characters in their system. We get to the next question. Why did you create the ORC? Role-playing games do an amazing job of infusing protectable creative descriptions with unprotectable game rules in a way that is challenging to separate legally. This complexity has had a stifling effect on creativity in our industry. We created the ORC license to be a tool that gives you the right to use an ORC licensor's protectable game mechanics easily and confidently. The ORC license grants users a license to the copyright protection that exists in this complex form of intellectual property without publishers having to hire lawyers to separate that which is copyright protected from that which isn't. The whole point of the ORC is to give the gaming community comfort, confidence, and certainty. It gives our community a license that is not reliant on any one company. Side note, this is again the reason why Paizo doesn't want to own the ORC and has given it to stewardship of Azora Law for now until they can find a nonprofit that deals with open source. The ORC license substantially reduces the threat of litigation regarding these matters, which could easily bankrupt a small publisher who is in the right and operating in good faith. This is how we create what the open source community refers to as a virtuous cycle, evolving our games to be the best they can be. This point here, again, friends of the monastery, Brother Tanner, Brother Derek and Sister Kira, they are in they are deliberately described right here. Small publishers who are in the right, operating in good faith.
Which is,
But
should we bring up the lawyer thing? I don't think it's as much of a secret anymore since they revealed the full title for the final release of Magi Knights.
yeah, sure, go.
They were in talks with their lawyer regarding the name, especially since one of the things they were concerned with was whether or not the owners of the Mage Knight IP would go after them. You and I had said that probably would not happen simply because there would be any lawyer would have to prove that there could be some degree of brand confusion.
Mm-hmm.
And just looking at it from a good faith layman perspective, it would be difficult to confuse a game heavily inspired by Mahou Shoujo and Super Sentai with a dark fantasy miniatures war game.
Yes, but I remember that Derek and Kira's specific concern was on the typefacing and iconography of their titles specifically.
Yes.
And I could see where that would be the concern for brand confusion, and I'm glad that they consulted an IP lawyer for that.
Mm-hmm. Eventually, they settled on using the title Magi Knights Awakening.
Yeah, they gave it basically a subtitle or an additional piece to the title that really separates it from Mage Knights and makes it safe, and it still conveys the game. Mm-hmm. It doesn't really confuse anything.
So then we get to, why is the license so complicated? We wish it were less complicated too. We opted for simplicity whenever possible, but when we were faced with the decision between precision or simplicity, we opted for precision. We wish it was simpler, but slicing copyright in half is challenging. We want this to last for a very, very long time and resist all imaginable legal challenges. If we could have found a way to make it simpler, we would have done so.
And this ties back into the first half of this when I pointed out that there are so many different pieces of future-proofing that keep this working. And as I stated, if this does get picked up and adopted as the next big thing for TTRPG licensing, if the ORC supplants the OGL, and I could definitely see it doing so, the ORC is in a better position than the OGL ever was because the ORC will not be owned by a single corporation. The ORC is future-proofed for media and distribution formats. It's future-proofed against people trying to do shoddy and shadowy royalty schemes. It's future-proofed against people trying to do morality clauses. And most of all, it is future-proofed by anyone trying to edit it so that it then becomes a useful bludgeon for them. Mm-hmm. That modifications clause at the very end of it is in no uncertain terms saying these rights will stay these rights. This license will stay this license, and you can't do a thing about that.
Yeah. Also, I should note a footer that simply states that the axe is not legal advice and does not create an attorney-client relationship.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense that Azor Law would put it on there because it does have their iconography in the header, but this is just an FAQ essentially. Mm-hmm. So the next question
is, who controls the ORC license? No one controls the ORC license. We felt it crucial that there be no parent organization. Any human-controlled organization can be politicized, acquired, or corrupted. The license derived integrity from not having the capacity to be updated or revised. No update could be permitted to change a pre-existing license, and no licensor or licensee could be forced to accept a third-party proposed revision. If someone in the future wants to propose a new license, they can always do that.
Which is essentially, as I said, a new license. They want to give this to a nonprofit that deals in housing open source things, because all that nonprofit will do is hold it in stewardship. Basically, we have the license, and we just keep it here so everybody can see it.
Mm-hmm. I'll go with the next one since it's pretty short. Can the ORC license be updated? Can it be revoked or amended? Can I pull my stuff out once I've licensed it? The ORC license cannot be updated, amended, repealed, revoked, or deauthorized by anyone, not ever. There will be no subsequent versions.
So the ORC license is the ORC license. You're not going to have a case of someone trying to update the ORC license to fuck you. That's the big point here. Yeah. And I know that it sounds to some people who think that an open source license should be able to update, amend, repeal, revoke, or deauthorize. Go look at the open source software licenses that the OGL was inspired by. They commonly only allowed for updates in necessity. And most of them did not allow for updates to their license otherwise.
Something else I should note. Before WotC decided to make the version of the OGL we've discussed put under a Creative Commons license, I do remember that I shared a video in the Monastery server where a few people had discussed the possibility that if WotC ended up going through with this, a lot of the software companies that utilize open licenses would be on their ass. And they've got more money. And the reason why they would be on their ass is because of the dangerous precedent that this would set, because you don't think Apple would like to retroactively amend open licenses so you can't use third-party shit on their computers? Given how they want to make everything proprietary?
Yep. Not to mention the fact that, Apple is Unix-based, so they could try to decouple themselves from having Linux interfere with their computers. Because you can actually use Linux to basically jailbreak anything Mac-based.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a different story.
Yeah.
We get to the next question. Why did Azora register copyright in the ORC license? And the answers are, we needed a system to assure that no one could modify the ORC license once it was released. We decided that by putting it on file as a registered copyright with the U.S. Library of Congress, if there was ever a dispute, there would be an unalterable, disinterested party, the U.S. government, that could hold the original. We didn't want a controlling organization because any organization can be politicized and manipulated. There was no host site we could find that we could guarantee to you would never alter the license or manipulate its terms. We hope this license lasts many decades, and thinking about the distant future is daunting because so much is possible. Azora law will never enforce copyright in the ORC license. Like game mechanics, there isn't much copyright protection for the instructions that comprise a license, but that isn't why we registered it. If you want to make a derivative license based on the ORC license, we hereby grant you unlimited permission to do that. So even the ORC license itself is ORC content, Monk.
There's an Inception moment if I ever heard one.
I love it. It's fantastic.
The next question is, if there is no organization, who enforces the ORC license? If you breach the ORC license, all the upstream licensors can sue you to enforce the license, but their remedy is limited to bringing you into compliance with the license. If the breach is timely remedied, the license is reinstated from the date of breach, which we already covered. We have intentionally not specified a jurisdiction, which means anyone suing to enforce the ORC will need to bring that dispute in your jurisdiction. This is a tool intended to discourage litigation. Because we've seen that whole stunt of the "I'll sue you in England" kind of thing because of the bias towards the plaintiff that British courts often have.
Yes, I was actually going to point out here that no specified jurisdiction because TTRPGs are a global phenomena. That's good. Mm-hmm. And B, this means bringing it to your jurisdiction means first of all, that you have the advantage of not having to leave wherever you are to appear in court. Mm-hmm. You just have to go to the court. And yes, as you pointed out exactly, the whole how people tried to sue in a specific jurisdiction because it is more favorable to their party.
Yeah, if I have to use a pop culture example, let's consider the lawsuit that Maddox tried to do against Dick Masterson, where even though all but one party that was sued is in California, he tried to sue in New York. It was never outright stated, but it's believed the reason he sued in New York is because New York has weaker anti-SLAPP laws. But he was living in the LA metro. Dick Masterson was living in L.A. Patreon, I don't think was headquartered in L.A., but they were listed as a defendant, along with a few of Dick's associates. Only one of whom is in the New York area.
Mm-hmm.
And the big thing that everybody brought back on the whole thing is, why is this happening in New York? All the main parties are not in New York; they're in California.
Yep. And so, with that, I'll move on. I think I'll grab like the next 3 because they're so short.
Mm-hmm.
Can I pull my stuff out of the ORC license once I put it in there? Nope. Once you release your content under the ORC license, you have given the world the right to use ORC content in that product forever under the terms and conditions of the ORC license. Now, here is where I'm going to go back to what Jeremy said regarding how this is not an open license. This is actually the exact definition of an open license. You apply the license, it's open to everyone to derive from you under the terms of that license therein. That is what it means to be an open license. If you have that license as part of your product, your service, whatever it is, what makes it an open license is that anyone can come and use what is termed within that license so long as they also honor that license. That's an open license. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, once you've made something ORC content, once you've applied the ORC license to your content and make it ORC content, anybody else can use your stuff openly, freely, period. Mm-hmm. So long as they attribute it correctly.
Yep.
Can I use it on a board game? Yep, you can use it for any sort of game you can imagine. Again, we covered that with the whole not limited to all of the things that are used for game mechanics.
Vince, if you're still watching this, maybe consider putting the ORC license in the next time you make an edition of Spell Slingers. Because if they're saying you can use it for any sort of game you imagine, that includes board and card games.
Yep. What about digital rights? Digital rights are fully included. Nothing in this license restricts the platform on which the ORC content can be used. In fact, Section 2A, hold on, let me pull that up. Section 2A specifically gives users a license to use ORC content, quote, in all media and formats, whether now known or hereafter created. Yes, and that is the thing that I pointed out earlier that was like, holy shit, this is future-proofing. If we create some sort of new storage method or anything like that, you could transfer it to that. Mm-hmm. And just a reminder, 2A is the primary grant to you. I won't go through the full thing again because it's not necessary.
Yeah.
All right, your turn, Monk.
Yep. How long does the ORC license... Oh, sorry, I skipped one. No, I didn't. How long does the ORC license last? Forever. Forever. Okay, there's my Sandlot joke for the week.
I love the Sandlot, so that was warranted.
Mm-hmm. The ORC license technically lasts for the life of the copyrights, but when copyright protection expires, you can still use the content because at that point it becomes public domain and everyone can use it without restriction.
Yeah. Now, I'd like to point out something Ethereal Dragon stated. So have the setting copyrighted before making a game with it. So actually, the ORC covers that, Ethereal. When we discussed it in the first half, and I know you're here for the first half, settings and other things of that nature are considered product identity. Trademarks, trade dress, non-functional and creative expressions that are not essential to or can be varied without altering the ideas or methods of operation of a game, including works of visual art, music and sound design, and clearly expressed and sufficiently delineated characters, character organizations, dialogues, settings, locations, worlds, plots, or storylines. So that's already covered by the license. That stuff is copyrightable to you because it's the creative part of things. You made that setting. You made those characters. You made that world. It is not part of ORC content because orc content are the non-copyrightable things of the game, the mechanics. And it's a really good way to get those mechanics around without having legal issues. At the beginning of the FAQ, they talked about why it's so complicated, because it's used to pull apart copyright and non-copyrightable things, and it's really complicated to do that, and precision is necessary.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Then we go to the question of, are there SRDs? There probably will be the equivalent of these, but the ORC license is designated not to require these. The fourth part of the ORC notice gives you a place to include system resource document content. Someone could create a system resource document, hereafter referred to as SRD, that contains what they believe is strictly a game mechanic system. The ORC license uses a definition system that defines what is licensed ORC content and what is unlicensed proprietary product identity, and lists that administrative burden from publishers. We believe these definitions are sufficiently robust to allow game designers, publishers, and lawyers acting in good faith to come to a common understanding about what is licensed without the administrative friction and potential for failure of coming up with an SRD for each product.
So they're saying that somebody probably will create SRDs regardless.
And they already have.
I mean, but as I pointed out with the sui generis database rights, SRDs and the wikis that use SRD information are going to be protected regardless. Mm-hmm. And like they say, they don't think that they need actual SRDs, because the definitions here in the ORC properly separate what is product identity and what is licensable content.
Yeah, I think the reason this question is brought up is because there was the associated SRD with the Open Gaming License. But the reason there was that associated SRD was to provide a baseline that people could build off of.
Yes. And so we get to the next question. I just got the license to build an RPG on the newest Hollywood blockbuster. Can I build this on the ORC license? Definitely, because you are not obligated to license any of your product identity back to the ORC community. You can create RPGs for whatever sports league, movie franchise, or entertainment brand you want without jeopardizing their assets. We have negotiated with most of the big movie studios and sport leagues, and while they have often come to the table wanting to own everything, including the game mechanics, we have rarely failed to educate them and eventually get clauses put in their contracts that they acknowledge that they do not own the game system, which is at the heart of the ORC license. So, I love this. This is this is Azura Law being cheeky a little bit about how they go, yeah, these definitions separate product identity, which is, like they said, on the newest Hollywood blockbuster. Let's say the Super Mario Brothers movie, the one that just came out. Nintendo could come to the table and go, okay, so we own all this stuff, Mario, Luigi, the Mushroom Kingdom, Peach, Bowser, etc., etc., etc. And then whoever's got the license to now make this game could say, well, okay, I'm going to make your game, and I'm going to do it using the ORC license and these properties. And then Nintendo could say, well, we want to own those mechanics, and all we have to do is go, no, you're wrong. You can't do that. Mm-hmm. Azura has done that with a lot of big people. Azura Law apparently has done that with a lot of big people. So it's a little cheeky thing from them going, hey, yeah, you can own all of your assets because you already own them, but you can't own game mechanics. They're not copyrightable.
Yep. And since the game mechanics is not copyrightable thing has been nailed down in the Supreme Court for 200 years.
Yep.
So.
Yep.
Then we get to, can I say which primary game my product is built on? Absolutely. The trademark legal doctrine of nominative fair use holds that you can say your product is compatible with another product. If you want to say your adventure is compatible with any famous brand, you have always had the right to do that provided A, you are not using their product identity, and B, you are not implying that you are authorized or endorsed by the companies that own those trademarks.
So essentially, if someone makes a derivative off of Paizo's Pathfinder 2e, and somebody goes, hey, my game is compatible with Paizo's Pathfinder 2e, which, by the way, they'll already know that from your orc notice.
Mm-hmm.
The orc notice is fucking genius. I swear to God. Because that attribution page literally says, the product is compatible with and based on the following orc content.
Mm-hmm.
So people are already going to know that your thing is compatible with Pathfinder 2e from Paizo because of that.
Yep.
And so long as you don't imply, oh yeah, Paizo's got my back on this, you're good. You're golden.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have the final question. Why not Creative Commons? We tried hard to make a Creative Commons license work, but we ran into one of two unresolvable problems. CC BY SA4 is a share-alike license under which the initial licenser can limit their licensed material to the orc content. Unfortunately, the share-alike provision requires the downstream community to share their entire work. We would have loved to make that work, but would have violated the terms of the license to limit the downstream community to licensing out only their orc content. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. So the reason why the CCBY SA4 was not a silver bullet solution for them is that they only want you to have to share the things that are covered as orc content, the game mechanics thereof. They want you to be able to keep your product identity. And by using CCBY SA4, SA meaning share alike, you'd even have to share your content, your product identity, and they didn't want that.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second one, Wizards used the CCBY4, which is not a share alike, which gives everyone the right to use the contents of the SRD they designated. This was a wonderful assurance for the gaming community that 5e could confidentially be used forever. Unfortunately, when another company builds on Wizards SRD, their innovations are trapped in their product and not automatically relicensed to the gaming community. This effectively kills the virtuous circle that open source communities are built on.
I'm probably going to have to send this to Mark when I get the chance, because this is a very effective counter-argument to something that he was asserting when Wizards pulled that stunt. Because he was saying that in doing that, it basically makes the orc license and similar ones obsolete. Given the fact that it's still in that closed circle,
Yep,
what
it
Wizards
doesn't
ended
get
up
relight.
making is a gilded cage.
Yep. It is not something that allows you to reshare only the unprotected elements or the elements that can't be protected by copyright, I should say.
Mm-hmm. So, with all that said, and I do apologize for the cutoff that happened. Again, I'm going to have to edit that.
Yep.
What do we all think of this draft version of the OpenRPG? Because I know that they're saying that this is a draft and wanting feedback, but there's not a whole lot of feedback I can really think of.
Well,
or as far as the way we do feedback.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing here is the type of feedback they're looking for is likely something not a lot of gamers, a lot of the TTRPG gamers are going to be able to give them because they don't have a background in law. Even my, if you'll excuse the colloquialism, jailhouse lawyering is not nearly enough to understand the intricacies of how this license works. And it would definitely need attention from dual IP lawyers. Again, lawful masses. Lawful masses would be great for this. And I might try to get his attention on.
Fuck it, get the attention of every single law tuber you can find, because we will fully admit we are not fully fully qualified to give the kind of feedback that I think Azora Law needs.
Yes, we absolutely need an actual legal community behind IP law. Essentially, you know, the IP law that is necessary for us to really interpret this license. There may be things that actual IP lawyers like Leonard French would say, hey, you might want to add this in here for a little bit more future proofing and safety.
Mm-hmm.
Then again, he may look at it and go, I don't see a problem, guys, go with it. But only a lawyer who has studied this type of law is going to be able to give those concrete answers. The feedback I can give from my layman's perspective is I think that it's innovative. I think that it properly separates what is yours from what you're licensing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the fact that they decided to issue morality clauses and royalties and make sure that those could never be implemented are good steps, because that keeps the creativity open.
Yeah.
And as they pointed out, continues to feed into the virtuous cycle. Jeremy says, this whole thing is cheeky. Nothing in this license is necessary. None of it is not already in law. It is basically a way to educate content creators on what is and is not IP in games, and a way for them to, quote, sound smarter than WotC. I don't think that's the case. Licenses...
This is doing what was initially intended, and this is something that the rules lawyer and other people have brought up. The reason why, now technically speaking, you're not wrong. There's nothing in the original OGL or the ORC that was not already in law. We've already talked about game mechanics not being copyrightable and how that's been a thing for decades. However, the reason why the OGL became such a standard across the industry and across the gaming ecosphere is it was an assured document that when they made something and utilized the open gaming license, as long as they followed the rules, they would be able to put their stuff out without having to worry about legal trouble. Because let's also keep in mind, one of the other reasons the OGL was made was a peace offering. In the final days of TSR, during the Lorraine Williams era, they were notoriously litigious and got a lot of hate for it, to the point where some people replaced the S with a $sign, because when people would put up custom rules, they would C&D and try and shut them down left and right. It was not a good time to be a fan of AD&D in the mid-90s. Oh, that along with a bunch of other stuff that's been covered in great detail, especially in the A Time of Wizards miniseries by Chuck Sonnenberg. This is in that similar vein of giving that understood protection that of this one document that can be pointed to. The main difference between this and the old open gaming license is a lot more emphasis on open content philosophy that's been kind of an accepted standard in internet culture since the late 90s.
Mm-hmm. I'd also like to go further. Yes, these things are in law. But just because they are in law doesn't prevent somebody from trying to take you to court. By enumerating all of the powers in a clear document and guaranteeing them, and then having that document for reference, as they stated in the Q&A, it is meant to discourage litigation. Because when the powers are enumerated in clear legalese, as clear as legalese gets, the things that are already in law are there clearly stated. So in the event someone does try to sue someone downstream for whatever reason that isn't, because as they said, the only reason that the upstream licensors can sue someone downstream is if someone downstream violates the license, and only insofar as to make them remedy that violation.
Mm-hmm.
And then they have to do it in the jurisdiction of the violator, giving all of the advantage to that one person that's being sued. If someone else tries to start a frivolous lawsuit, you won't even get to a point where the legal fees are that high, because the person who is being frivolously sued just has to go, it's under the ORC license, and provide that documentation to any judge with a bench motion to dismiss. With prejudice. Dismissing with prejudice would be the best motion to use.
Mm-hmm.
And any judge worth their salt who knows a little bit about IP law, and there are judges for this, will go, yeah, okay, dismissed. Thank you for wasting all our times, Mr. Complainant. Go away. Stop being a vexatious litigant.
Zan, what is the first rule of the court?
Go ahead and tell them.
Don't piss off the judge. Oh. And he said... He replied. Jeremy says, "I hear that it's a preemptive strike against litigation, but it doesn't need to be a license. It could have been a document explaining what is actually in the law. I'm going to call it out for what it is. The license part is nothing more and nothing less than a marketing ploy." I don't see how this could be a marketing ploy, because Azora law is not necessarily in the RPG business. Paizo may have assisted in writing it, but as has been made explicitly clear, they don't own it.
On top of that, explaining what is in law is
teeth.
different. Well, no, explaining what is in law is one thing. But even if it explains what is in law, you're going to have to fight it in court. By having a licensor and a licensee, you have a contractual transaction and the obligations of contract. And that means that a licensor has literally taken this thing and given it to the licensee. And the licensee has a bill of sale, a receipt, whatever you want to call it, right there in the ORC license. It's something that can't be fought over. That's the reason you have a license granted. Because that way you don't have someone coming up and saying, oh, well, I never gave them those powers. And then somebody has to then prove that, oh, I don't need your permission for those powers. This is an explicit statement of someone saying, here, have these powers, and the other person going, thanks, I'll take those powers. And that makes it so that litigation is nearly shut down.
Mm-hmm.
At least as far as I understand it.
Two things can be true. One, this could potentially be a very useful and beneficial license. And two, they probably also did it for a PR move. I think both of these things can hold true.
Except, if I'm being honest, the notion of it being done for a PR move doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, because Paizo, aside from this, was when this draft was announced, that was the first that Paizo had even talked about this whole thing since they initially announced that this was an initiative they were going to be going with. The last few weeks, they've been spending more of their time promoting Warhorn. So, and furthermore, as I said again, Paizo's just one of the licensees of this. Azora Law is a IP law firm. They're not in the TTRPG business in that capacity.
Yeah, the
not everything is ops, people.
Yes, that's one thing. The other thing is that if this were some sort of marketing scheme or publicity stunt, there would have been more bombast around it, and not just from Paizo, because there are probably about a dozen or so different names that have already attached themselves to this.
There's been 1,500. There's been 1,500 names, and he brings that up that thousands signed up without seeing anything. They didn't sign up. They just publicly voiced their support of the concept, since they put this out right around the time that the Open D&D hashtag was going about.
Yeah.
And since a lot of people were very, very frightened that they could end up going through lawsuit hell due to the retroactive nature of what WotC was doing, it is understandable why they voiced their support of the ORC license.
Yeah. The concept of the ORC was something people were voicing support of, but nobody actually put their names onto until very recently, such as we mentioned, Chaosium Games. Something else that needs to be considered, is that when it comes to that sort of PR thing, that's not really how the greater RPG ecosystem works. The ecosystem there are very few full-on companies when it comes to tabletop role-playing games. The vast majority of people putting stuff out are independents. Either individuals or small teams like yourself, Jeremy, putting out their particular product. It is in that, and because of that, the idea of it being PR in the company sense does not really fly. Even bigger companies like, say, Green Ronin are not a corporation style company. They're just the equivalent of a super indie. It's honestly not that much different from when a bunch of wrestlers get together to do some sort of crossover indie show. I'd also like to add on that Paizo spearing this, essentially being the tip of the spear for this whole movement of creating some sort of open license that isn't the OGL, because there were a lot of names that were saying they were going to create their own version at the time that Open D&D was a hashtag. Paizo, I think, felt closer than most, considering how Pathfinder derived off of 3 and 3.5. And I don't think that this was them trying to up their numbers. They really didn't need to.
They didn't need to because they ended up blowing through their stock. They ended up blowing through their stock in 2 weeks, anyways. The thing is, everybody has been selling like hotcakes in the wake of this whole thing.
Yeah.
Paizo put out a statement on social media stating that they had a year's worth of physical stock for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. They blew through the whole thing in 2 weeks. And they've been in a scramble to get a new print run set up, which obviously is going to take time.
Yeah. But I feel like this is more Paizo reacting protectively over the gaming community that they value. Plus, they wanted to step up and say, this isn't right. We're going to make something better than this, so that you guys don't have to be scared and don't have to suddenly become as big as us to defend yourselves. Because Paizo, like you pointed, most of the environment is small indies. Paizo is not that anymore.
And let's also the other reason I wanted to bring that up is a lot of people. There's a very interconnected nature with the TTRPG scene. Has been since the 70s. Mm-hmm. Within various communities, everybody knows somebody.
Mhm.
which has its upsides and its downsides. And one of the things I said when the OGL debacle happened is this was something that could only be created by someone who does not understand the subculture of TTRPG development, which is something that I ended up learning very quickly as I've done the over 600 interviews on this channel. Frequently when I go back and look at games that I've owned or games that are coming out, I end up seeing names repeatedly crop up and going, "Hey, I know that guy." And the analogy that I used was that it was akin to the way Vince McMahon acted during the first incarnation of the XFL. It was very clear that Vince McMahon had no understanding of football culture. And if you want the ultimate case in point with this, I highly advise all of you to go watch the interview that Bob Costas did with him, where he pretty much ripped him apart. And of course, the failure of the first incarnation of the XFL demonstrates that fact. The second and third incarnation obviously aren't. Well, the second one he was barely involved, and that one was doing everything right. It's just really bad timing with the coof. And the third version is not owned by him; it's owned by Dwayne Johnson. He's, even though he was the spearhead, he only showed up for the first game of the season, right before kickoff. And let's not and a lot of the stuff that was going on with the OGL debacle, this was shortly after they had hired somebody whose background was working in Microsoft's video game division. And it was very clear that they did not know how this ecosystem works. A lot of it is...
didn't know how the gaming ecosystem worked back in Microsoft's gaming division either.
Mm-hmm. a lot of the TTRPG ecosystem is very interconnected. Stop me if you've heard this one before. Someone's frustrated with a rule set, house rules it, until they end up making something completely different, then sells that as their own thing because of how far removed it's become.
Can I say literally the entire TTRPG landscape since the 80s for 500, Alex?
Yeah.
I mean, if we're gonna call a spade a spade.
This is the reason why when somebody says that their project started as a bunch of house rules of something that came before, I usually tell them they're in good company. And the two big examples I always bring up are Chivalry and Sorcery and Rollmaster. Though there are others as well. I ended up learning that one of the big inspirations for Talislanta was the action control table that was used with Zeb's version of Conan, and later reincarnated in Zeb's fantasy role-playing system, and one of the later editions of Gamma World during the TSR era, and Marvel Phase Rip. It's just that he used a D20 instead of a D100.
Yeah. So, if we want to put it generously, the TTRPG world is one of interconnectedness and modification to create a bunch of innovation. If we want to put it less generously, the TTRPG creative world is a giant incestuous clusterfuck.
And I suppose another this is somewhat of a parallel, but not quite, is the effect of sampling when it comes to music scenes. And how sampling created a snowball effect that ended up creating whole genres and subgenres of music.
Mm-hmm.
Granted, it's had its legal hurdles, but that's a whole other story.
the point in the end is that going back to PR stunt or not, this was always going to raise a certain amount of PR, but I don't think that was ever the intention or impetus. It very much seemed that the impetus for all of these different new open source licenses was to make the TTRPG landscape was to preserve it in the face of this OGL debacle. And once people had started making those plans and realizing that making those plans was a good idea, regardless of whether it's the ORC or anybody else who announced that they were going to do their own thing, it was going to always move forward to create an actual license somewhere. And honestly, whether other people continue to make their own things or whether they all hop onto ORC is not extremely relevant. The ORC will exist there for people who want to use it. Those others will exist there for other people who want to use those. But in the end, what it does is preserve the innovation and creativity of the TTRPG landscape. And that's the most important part of all of this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, personally, it's an issue of I don't really care how much PR played a part. I think this is a good thing overall. Regardless of what anyone's motivations actually are. As long as what comes after this first draft, assuming we're reading it right, I should say, this first draft seems solid. I can't think of any ways this could be used to screw anybody over. So yeah, I'm liking it so far.
Yeah, it was very much described as a way to protect people rather than to fuck them over.
Yeah.
And I'll go one further and bring up the continuing Twitter controversies surrounding Mr. Beast as an analogy. Regardless of what Mr. Beast's motivations are for doing the videos he does, they end up doing good things.
Yeah.
So again, regardless what the motivation behind the ORC was, it's ending up doing good things.
Yeah. Now, the other thing I'll note, just because, again, like you said, no one here's a lawyer, so we can only kind of do our best guess as to what the intention behind this text is. What kind of also has me on the side of this ORC is looking over some of the lists of people who are kind of behind this and supporting it. It's not like just groups of people with like certain ideologies or anything like that. It's all sorts of different people who've started looking at this and going, I like what I'm seeing.
Yeah, and
so
already the first blow has been made because, as I pointed out at the start of this, Chaosium recently released a new edition of Basic Role-Playing, which utilizes this license.
I even like seeing competing virtual tabletops both looking at this and going, yeah, this seems like a good idea.
I just love the fact that this is something that an entire worldwide community got behind and went, okay, let's do this.
Mm-hmm. And again, this brings this now. As far as what WotC's response to this kind of thing could be, I guess the closest to that would be the Creator Summit, which I get the feeling was their attempt to try and mend bridges, but even in that contest, they still lost. This is how you lose at losing, because there were a few things that were brought up, and I brought them up in conversation elsewhere. One, we have a reason why their virtual tabletop is using Unreal Engine 5, and unsurprisingly, it's a stupid reason. They want to put this on PC and console. The PC part, I've got no problem with. Big flippin' deal. Tailspinner uses 3D graphics, and even though it's got a bottleneck, I've got no problem. But console, that is a bad idea. That is a unforced error. And as far as why, consider this. Would either of you catch yourself dead playing a 4X or a grand strategy game or even an RTS with say a Xbox One or PS4 or PS5 controller?
Yeah, no.
I know I asked that kind of thing when we dismantled the whole devs JRPG video, but it does apply here just as much. There is a reason why you see very few RTSs for consoles. Most of the market that's playing RTSs are playing it on PC. If you want to get any sort of success with your RTS or your 4X or your grand strategy game, PC is the way to go. I don't even think people would even play it on Steam Deck. At least I haven't seen anybody try.
I mean, there's Goblin Commander, which is a very stripped down RTS.
Goblin Commander and Halo Wars do not count for the purposes of this.
But that's what I'm saying. Like, to make it work, you gotta strip it down a lot. You can't have that level of complexity.
And we are in a very competitive scene when it comes to virtual tabletop. You have, and we're not limited to these, Roll20, Fantasy Grounds, I think Astral is still around, Alchemy, Shard Tabletop, Foundry, Mythic Table, which is open source. All of those do not utilize any sort of high graphical setup for the specific purpose of allowing you to play it on just about anything, consoles notwithstanding, because nobody's going to play a virtual tabletop on a console. This can be when I say that, I mean you can play them on a fucking potato as long as you can connect to the internet. And originally I said by going with that kind of graphical setup, they're going to bottleneck the amount of people that are going to be able to try it. Then I found out that they wanted to do it on console, and I'm like, if you're at that point, you may as well just make a CRPG with console controls, because that's basically what you're doing. And Of course, there was the infamous thing about the whole half races thing, which Zan and I had already future-proofed for with FF Legend, and I know that Vincent had brought up that you can still play as half races in other worlds. And I will be talking about that and how that and some of the other stunt that they did to get rid of negative modifiers is a case of congratulations, here's your no prize. But there was very little, if any, attempt to bring up how they were going to bring back people who were lapsed after the whole OGL thing, and that was something that they got roasted at hard by every influencer who they brought in. Unsurprisingly, I was not brought in, but that's probably because I'm pretty sure there's a few people at WotC who are afraid of me. As they should be.
I mean, why not?
I mean, because Lord knows if I was at the Creator Summit, you all would have known about it. Everybody online would have known about it, because I would be causing a scene. Not going in with the intent of causing a scene. It's just the certainty of a fallen rock.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as far as the, if I'm being honest, when it comes to future releases, I don't think we're going to see the ORC be name dropped all that explicitly. If anything, it's just going to be something that's quietly introduced to people's future products.
Wouldn't surprise me.
Oh. And as far as I do, the big reason why I had to bring up I had to bring up Chaosium doing it is because Chaosium is not some fly by night company. But truth, and I told you this the other day when we were offline, or not live. I had said that I can't help but wonder if part of the reason they jumped on it was because they had 3 open licenses and it was best to do a streamlining. Because they had an open license for basic role playing, RuneQuest, and Call of Cthulhu. And you know how those charts of different special edition pre-order bonuses for certain AAA games? They had something like that as far as what you could and couldn't use. It was a bit much. So putting on this particular hat is a case of all we need is this and that's it. Well, sign us the fuck up.
Mm-hmm.
But that is going to do it for this particular episode. I don't plan on doing another one of these. I know that there's a few other SRDs and the like that are coming out from other people. I don't have any intention on doing those. Mostly because there's not a whole lot for us to really dissect. Especially since those ones are specific to their particular system. Whereas the Open RPG is meant to bring in the open source movement, so this is one I wanted to bring up. And as far as the question of whether or not I would use the ORC for any future project of mine, probably. But with all that said, I will be back here tomorrow with an interview with Peter Leclerc if all things go as planned, and Friday we'll be continuing our look into Faith on the Valley of the Judged, which has been really damn good and allows me to eventually talk about card mechanics. Saturday is going to be a busy day for me.
For us.
Well, you just have to do the whole thing with Mark. I've got 2 other interviews I'm doing that day.
Fair.
And Sunday will be a return of a familiar topic in Geek Watch and a familiar face that I haven't spoken to in about a year or so. But that is a story for another night. So, as always, a sincere thanks to everyone who took the time out of their schedule to come onto the show and enjoy the madness at play here. And there will be plenty more where that came from, as there always is here on the open bar of the internet. But until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra. I am your gaming monk. Stay fucking frosty, everybody.